There are many ways to guide the eyes of your viewers. Lighting, color, composition. There is a very powerful tool that we're going to explore today, and that's something called depth of field. By mastering depth of field, you guys can hijack the eyes of your viewers and guide them to points of interest in your frame. Depth of field refers to the distance in a scene that appears acceptably sharp. It can control what the audience focuses on, whether that's a single subject or the entire frame. And we can manipulate depth of field in several ways. Now, primarily, you can manipulate depth of field by the use of aperture, focal length, and the distance between the subject and the camera. Now, when people think of the cinematic look, they often visualize an image with a very shallow depth of field. And basically what a shallow depth of field does is that it creates a very small zone of focus. So it will isolate your subject and blur everything in the foreground or the background out. If you guys take a look at some of these images right here, what really makes them pop is how in focus and sharp the subject is, while you get this really nice, beautiful bokeh in the background. And for those of you who don't know what bokeh is, this is just referring to the out of focus quality of the image. And a lot of the times, lenses will give a different type of character and a different type of bokeh to the image. Some lenses will give oval shaped bokehs, like in anamorphic lenses, and then you have spherical lenses which will give like round bokeh balls. And yes, while the overall image does look pretty, especially with all the nice bokeh in the background, there is a very important storytelling tool when you decide to use shallow depth of field. This technique, a lot of the times in film, can be used to emphasize a character's emotions and really pull the audience into that intimate moment that they're having on screen. A perfect example of this would be some of these shots from Her. If you take a look at these scenes of Joaquin Phoenix, where his face is in sharp focus, but the city behind him is completely blurred out, it really keeps the viewer connected and present into his emotions and into his face, and it separates and removes him from the background, which kind of does two things. Yes, it makes us pay attention to the character, but it also isolates our character, and it makes you feel like the background that he's in, or the world that he's in, he's somewhat removed from. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have something called a deep focus, or a deep depth of field. This technique tends to keep everything in the frame, from the foreground to the background, in sharp focus, giving the audience the ability to see everything in a scene. And the best way to achieve this is probably by just raising your aperture and typically using wider angle lenses, something like a 16, a 24, or even a 35mm. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I first started filmmaking, I was really under the impression that having that nice blurry background and having an isolated subject that's really sharp in focus and shooting things on 50mm or 85mm was always the way to go, because that was the way you needed to shoot films to get that cinematic look. And the truth is that I messed up plenty of shots early on in my career trying to do this, or trying to shoot with a 50 or an 85mm, because number one, I wasn't taking the story into account, and number two, there were definitely some times where I could have benefited from using a deep depth of field and a wider focal length. So let's take a second and talk about that. Why would you decide to shoot with a deep depth of field? First of all, when you have multiple characters in your scene, and you need to showcase all of their expressions, or you want to make sure that all of them are being able to be seen, and you have different characters at different depths, the only way to achieve being able to see all of them is using a deep depth of field. Another example would be, what if a character is trucking through a large, vast landscape and you don't want to just isolate them from the background, but you want to show the landscape that they're in. So you want to show a deeper depth of field. You don't want to just have just them in focus, because again, that would remove them from the background. You want to show them in this vast landscape. And then another vital thing to think about is nailing focus. It's a lot easier to nail focus at an f4 to an f6 than it is to try to nail focus at an f1.8 or a 2.0. And that's just because you have a deeper depth of field. And a lot of the times, having your subject in really sharp focus requires you to do something like that. And don't be afraid to showcase the background and their surroundings, because if you take a look at movies, there's a very specific reason why they shoot at a very shallow depth of field. It's because, again, they're trying to tell a story, but there's no way that they're shooting everything at a 1.8 or a 2.0 or even a 2.2. In fact, I think a lot of films shoot between the area of 2.8 to 6 or 7 of an f-stop, just because they need to get multiple things in focus, or maybe they have a focus puller trying to rack focus on many different things in a scene. So all of these things you have to take into consideration when you guys are thinking about depth of field. Now, speaking about racking focus, let's talk about that for a second. A great way to guide your audience's attention from one subject to another is with something called rack focusing. This can be a great storytelling tool to reveal an object, character, or the environment that your character's in. There are so many times in storytelling where rack focusing on one object and then going to a character or from one character to the next is such a vital storytelling role, and there's definitely a reason why you would choose to rack focus from one subject to another in a frame.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Everybody knows that music is a key component to filmmaking, and when I'm looking for the perfect track for my YouTube videos or even my films, I go to audio.com. Audio.com has thousands of quality music and sound design tracks from real artists and composers, and one of my favorite features about audio is the ability to use stems. Now, for those of you who don't know what stems are, they're incredible. Basically, they're isolated sections of a song or a track that you could download and use in your films. So if you want something like just the piano or just the bass track to be able to create atmosphere or any kind of low bed of sound, you can easily do that. And there are so many times where I'm actually using this in my films. But the real game changer that audio has implemented just recently is something called Hans AI. And basically this is an extremely advanced AI search tool where you can type anything you want into the UI and it'll find you the perfect track or sound. I'm not sure about you guys, but I use ChatGPT for almost anything. And what I love about this new feature that audio brought in is that it feels a lot like that. And you have the ability to just type in whatever you want. And it's almost like having your own dedicated music rep that goes out and finds you the perfect track for your film. And right now, you guys can get unlimited access to use Hans AI for 70% off your first year of Audio Pro when you use my link down below. And that's unlimited music and sound effects for just $59 a year, which is an absolutely insane deal. Now, one of the most interesting ways to achieve shooting subjects in focus at different distances is with something called a split diopter lens. And what this does is allow you to have half the frame in sharp focus while you have the other half of the frame blurring both the foreground and the background subjects in focus. And what this does is create a really striking and sometimes unsettling effect because this is such an unnatural thing from what our eyes are used to seeing in real life. If we take a look at this scene from The Departed, both characters are hiding something, and by using the split diopter, while they are both in focus, they somehow feel far apart, and it feels like there's a distance between them. And I thought that this was a genius move from either the director or the cinematographer, whoever decided to shoot this like this, because what this does is give you this weird feeling. If you look at this frame right now, you guys can tell that it doesn't look right, but at the same time, in the actual storytelling element, like I said, they're both hiding something. They're both being secretive from each other. And it was a very cool storytelling technique that they used to shoot this scene. Now, the split diopter is awesome, but another really awesome tool is something called a tilt shift lens. And what a tilt shift lens does is basically create selective focus areas in a very specific part of the image, often making large scenes look like they're shot like a miniature or something like that. In The Assassination of Jesse James, Roger Deakins used tilt shift lenses to create selective focus, blurring parts of the frame while keeping others sharply in focus. This effect mimics how we perceive memories, fragmented and distorted, yet deeply emotional. And another really awesome movie that they did this in was Game Night, where they used the tilt shift lens to make it feel like the real world was kind of like a game board. So whether you're looking to highlight characters' emotion with shallow depth of field, explore complex relationships through deep focus, or create dynamic shifts in your story with rack focusing, or even with specialized lenses, depth of field is a key component to controlling your viewer's experience. And by mastering depth of field, you guys can open up a whole world of creative possibilities for your films. And if you guys are interested in learning more about filmmaking, me and my team have been putting together a course that breaks down every step of the filmmaking process, starting with, concepting and scripting and going all the way into cinematography and visual storytelling, even taking a deep dive into our editing process of how we edit and produce a film. Right now, we're not only in the process of filming for the course, but we're also producing for a short film that we hope to have produced by like January or February of next year. So if you guys are interested in that, I'll leave a link down below. You guys can check that out. And yeah, man, thank you guys so much for stopping in and hanging out. My name is Alex Zarfati. I'll see you guys next week.